Welcome to Pretty Lies and Alibis. Let's seek the truth and travel the long road to justice together. What you know, Alibiers, welcome to another episode of Pretty Lies and Alibis. I'm Gigi. It's Monday and it's late. I had a doctor's appointment that went a little bit longer than I thought it would today, and then I had to catch back up on the testimony I missed. So I'm just finishing up. But we're going to bring you day one of the Taylor Schabusiness trial. It's been interesting to say the least. Real quick before we jump into the trial, Carly Russell admitted that she made the whole kidnapping story up. There was a press conference today by the Hoover Police Department where she was supposed to actually meet with them today. Instead, her attorney released a statement to police and investigators where there was never a baby on the side of the road. She was never kidnapped by some mystery couple who blindfolded her and fed her Cheez-Its and all that jazz. So they are probably getting some charges ready, I would assume. Not much known other than that. They just don't know where she was for the time that she was considered to be a missing person, because they still haven't talked to her. The other thing that I wanted to touch on, and I'm going to do a full episode about this tomorrow at some point if I have time, but Rex Heuermann, police announced today that contrary to what we learned yesterday, there was some confusion about a soundproof room. He did not have a soundproof room in his home. The spokesperson said that might have been confused with the vault, but nonetheless, still terrifying either way you look at it. They've been excavating that entire backyard today with a backhoe. And I believe they're nearly finished with the house, and they announced maybe a couple of more days that they would be on scene and should be finished up there. And I'm not sure what we'll find out as far as what they found. He does have another hearing August 1st. I will be traveling that day, so I'm hopefully going to be able to watch that if it's streamed on the flight back to home from Lori Vallow's sentencing, which is a week from today, Monday. All right, music fact of the day. Peter Frampton was an advisor on the 2000 movie Almost Famous. It's such a great movie, one of my favorites. He has a cameo as the tour manager for a band called Humble Pie, which was his actual former group. There you go. Now you know I love me some Peter Frampton. Show me the way. All right, so we're going to do this Taylor Schabusiness trial. This woman is 50 Shades of Grey. I'm not being rude, but she's so bizarre. And her body language and her facial expressions are very out there, not appropriate for why we're here and the just brutality of the murder and dismemberment that she admittedly committed. We've seen that more than once with defendants, and it's no different in this case. She's entered 2 pleas, not guilty and not guilty by reason of mental defect. So for the openings, the state said on February 22nd, 2022, in the early morning hours, Taylor strangled her friend Shad with a dog collar. After he was dead, she engaged in sex acts with his body and subsequently dismembered him with kitchen knives. Here is my big question. We've covered dismemberment cases. We recently had this crash course on Chandler Halderson over the week of the 4th, and he used all these hacksaws and bigger blade tools. It seems like this woman dismembered this man with kitchen knives and paring knives. I don't know how she did it. February 23rd, normal cold February morning in Wisconsin, and Tara, which is Shad's mother, she's awoken by a storm door being closed. It's around 2:30 to 3 in the morning, and she's aware that Shad was in the basement with Taylor. They've been down there the whole day before, and she goes to see what's going on. She sees the basement light is on, and she goes down the stairs. One half of that basement was finished. The other half was unfinished, and that's kind of where they had a laundry room and a little shower area. Right next to the stairs, there's a 5-gallon bucket covered with a towel. Unfortunately, she sees a mother's worst nightmare. Her son's head is in a bucket. She goes to talk to her boyfriend. He also checks the bucket, and they call 911. You'll hear from the officers who arrived on the scene, and you'll hear what they saw. There's not a significant amount of blood on the walls. It takes time to see the full extent of what the defendant did in this case. She's talking to investigators at this point, saying that Shad is in the basement. There's a blood-soaked mattress in the basement once you remove the blankets. There is a teal tote and a larger Tupperware container that has knives and body parts of Shad. There's a duffel bag, a backpack that has parts of shad in it, and a knife used in the dismemberment. There were signs of methamphetamine use, which the defendant said her and Shad used just before. You'll hear about cleaning products. You'll hear the medical examiner say parts of Shad weren't found in his basement. His legs were in her van. The medical examiner will tell you the cause of death is strangulation, significant force applied to the neck, and dismemberment after the fact. A few hours after the 911 call, law enforcement gets word Shad was with Taylor before the offense, and they find her at her apartment. You'll see how she's caught red-handed, blood on her hands, clothing, and a significant knife wound was suffered in the course of events. She talks to law enforcement for a long time. Detective David Graff interviews Taylor along with another detective, and they learn more about what happens leading up to the crimes. It's a significant and lengthy interview, and you'll see what she says matches what is being discovered in the basement. Her and Shad were friends in school. They go to the basement and they're let in by Steve in the early morning of the 22nd. She says what begins as a sexual encounter and a dog collar being put around his neck. She describes what happens to Shad. This is an intentional act, not one gunshot. She's pulling harder, hoping he eventually passes. It takes several minutes. She describes what she did to his body after and then dismembers him. She says law enforcement will have fun finding body parts in the basement and tells them where to look. She admits to cleaning up, avoiding responsibility in this. The dismemberment takes the entire day of the 22nd. Tara wakes up to her leaving at 2:30 a.m. on the 23rd. They send DNA to the lab, which confirms why we're here. Blood on her hands, the knives, and her clothing all had Shad's DNA on it. This isn't a whodunit. You'll hear her saying, I did it, and forensic evidence backs that up. It's not an accident, it's intentional. She's engaged in oral contact with his body and inserted objects into his body after the fact. The case comes down to choices and consequences. Choices to use meth, choices to kill Shad, and degrade him after the fact. That was kind of the prosecution's openings. I think they had a 30-minute limit, I heard. The defense, he just explains the state's burden and how they have to prove the facts of the case. He says Taylor has a right to remain silent. She has a right not to testify, but she may testify. I hope she testifies, y'all. She was friends with Shad. They went to high school together. They had classes together. When they were younger, they dated for a period of time, but they were just friends. You're going to hear the 911 call, and you'll hear testimony from Shad's mom and her boyfriend. He saw a bucket and a human head in that bucket. Tara saw it first. Tara is Shad's mother. It's a small, quaint home. It has a loft upstairs, a floor level, and a basement. We believe Stephen last saw Shad at the house on Monday, February 21st of 2022. They will indicate they did not see Taylor leave. They heard a door slam. You'll hear officers did a protective sweep to see if anyone was in the house. The only ones who were there were Tara, Stephen, her partner, and a daughter, Ava, which is Shad's sister. Taylor wasn't there. She wasn't anywhere in the house. There was an investigation and things were found. Law enforcement didn't have a clear picture of what was happening, so they tried to figure things out as they went along. You'll hear about Taylor's apartment. Law enforcement went there. My client was arrested and taken to the Green Bay Police Department. Law enforcement arrested the other person in Taylor's apartment, Scott, who lived with her. Officers found a gold Town and Country minivan parked in the parking lot, and there was concerns about it. It was owned by Scott. There was a crock pot box with human body parts in it. A sex toy was found. The DNA expert will testify that the swab of the item was inconclusive with Shad's DNA. His DNA was not on it. The state will argue a sex assault took place. You will have to take that into consideration. You're going to see a lengthy video with two detectives and Taylor. They talk, and Detective Roth asks a lot of questions about what may or may not had happened. Pay attention to what was said. You have to assess the credibility of every witness. Don't rush to judgment when considering the evidence. There's two sides to every story, and we ask you to find our client not guilty. First witness, Amy Shannon, who worked 911 dispatch. She explains how they keep records, and they're held for 180 days. If they're not preserved, they get written over. The 911 call was placed February 23rd at 3:24 a.m. This is the calmest 911 call I've ever heard. I think it was just the fact that Tara and Steve were absolutely in shock about what they had found. Steve says, "I'd like an officer. My girlfriend woke me up swearing she found her son's head in the basement." He gives the address and also his phone number. Steve says, "My girl swears she found her son's severed head in the basement in a bucket. I went down there. I can't tell what the F it is. I'm kind of a little freaked out." Dispatch asks, "Whose head is it and how old is her son?" He says he's 24 or 25. Dispatch asks, "Was he missing?" And Steve says, "No, he was here yesterday with some chick. Then all of a sudden, nobody's here. She came up to use the restroom a couple of times. She keeps calling and calling, and now she's saying she hears the phone down there too." The dispatch says, "Is she there with you?" And Steve says, "Yeah, she's a little freaked out right now. I don't know what to do. I went down there, I lifted the towel, but I can't see very well. I can't tell what it is." Dispatch, "Is there something in the bucket?" And Steve says, "There's something in the bucket." Dispatch, "Do you think she's hallucinating?" Steve says, "I don't think so. Something's in the bucket. She kind of freaked out and it's freaking me out." So at this point, the dispatch asks to speak to Tara. Tara says, "My son's head is in a bucket." And dispatch says, "What makes you say that?" And she says, "I looked in the bucket." Dispatch asks, "What did you see? Where's the rest of the body at?" And she says she has no idea. She's asked when she last saw Shad. He had been at his dad's on Monday and came to stay there for a few days. It was hard to understand some of that. I couldn't make out what she was saying. Tara said he was with Taylor Coronado. That's her real given name before her name changed to Schabusiness. He was in middle and high school with Taylor, and the defense asked, "When was the last time you saw him?" Tara said, "Well, he left with her. They both came back. I believe they were both sleeping Monday night. I assume they slept all day yesterday, so I haven't seen him since Monday. I was gone a little while yesterday. I heard my door and her minivan start. I was upstairs. The light was on in the basement, and I went to turn them off. I look around, and no one was down there. I turned to come back up the stairs, and I saw a 5-gallon bucket, and I'm like, oh, great, they're pissing in a bucket. And I look, and that's not what's in the bucket." Dispatch, "Is there blood down there?" And she says no. Dispatch lets her know they have officers on the way and tells her to stay away from the bucket. Tara says her 16-year-old is in the house sleeping and asks if police could not make a lot of noise. And then dispatch again says, "You're sure? Could it be a fake head?" Can't understand what was being said, but it was something about she's not looking at it again. On cross, she just explains these calls auto erase after 180 days, so she preserved it. He asked where it was sent to. She said to the DA's office. He asks if there's any way that call was altered, and she said no. Then he asks who had access to that recording. She said myself and any supervisor that would have been on duty. She was asked if the call was modified, and she said no. That was it for her. Next witness, Officer Alex Wanish. He was the first officer to arrive at the house. Another officer stayed upstairs to keep an eye on things on that level. Officer Wanish went into the basement and saw this bucket with a towel covering it. He lifted the towel and saw the severed head in the bucket. He then had another officer come down the stairs to verify. They notified a supervisor and asked for additional units. We're seeing his body cam on screen at this point. You can go back and watch it. By the way, I'm not showing any graphic pictures on this coverage. If you want to see the photos, you can go to Law and Crime's live feeds and scroll through and see the photos yourself. I just don't want to put that out there on the internet. We see Tara showing him where the bucket is from the top of the stairs. He walks down and removes the towel, and you hear him tell the other officer to come down there. And I think one of the officers says, "Oh, fudge," but not fudge, if you get my drift. They go back again to look. And the one guy that was called down, he just looked horrified and kind of frozen. With what he had just seen. I can't imagine. Couldn't do what they do. Alex calls on the radio and says they're going to be more units, and sooner than later would be appreciated. He said, "We have quite a lot of blood down here," and the officer walks upstairs and they stop the video. The prosecution asks when walking around the basement if he saw any more body parts, and he said no. He saw blood on the floor and chunks of human flesh and dry blood on the mattress. Once other officers arrived, they conducted a protective sweep of the residence. Other than the towel, nothing was moved by the initial responding officers. Detectives arrived and the witness maintained the scene, and other officers transported Tara, Steve, and Ava to the police station to be questioned. And so he stayed, maintained the crime scene, started a crime scene log to document who went from the scene, and he and his partner also put up the crime scene tape. So on cross, the defense asks what door he knocked on when he arrived, and he said the side door off the driveway. And he's asked if it's nighttime, and the officer says yes, it was 3:25 when he responded. He's asked, were Tara and Steve in shock? The officer said they appeared so. The defense asked, before you got there, was it your understanding they were in bed, something woke them up, and they called police? And he said yes. They described to the officer what they saw, and the defense asked, did they indicate Shad would come to the house for a few days, come back to do laundry? And the officer said this was not Shad's primary residence, but he would come visit, do his laundry, and also see his little sister. The defense says, you went to the basement to look in the bucket with a high-powered flashlight. And he said, yes. He's asked, was there a laundry area and an open room to the right? And he said, yes. He's asked, was that used for storage? And the officer said yes, and there was a stack of mattresses. Did the bucket have something over it? The officer says yes. The defense says, was it your duty to remove the towel? The officer said yes to verify what we had. The defense says, did you have gloves on? He says yes. He's asked, when did you put them on? Right after I got out of the squad car. Did you keep them on the entire time you were in the home? And he says yes. You removed the towel, and did you ask Officer Plunky to look? He said yes. He's asked if he put the towel back, and he said no. The defense says it was allowed to lay on the floor, and he said it was laid next to the bucket. He's asked, did anyone in the house touch what was in the bucket or move it in any way? And he said they both looked at it. Steve couldn't tell what it was. Tara was positive it was her son. He's asked, we see you pull out your service revolver. Were you doing a protective sweep? And he said, yes. They cleared the rest of the house when more officers arrived on scene. He's asked, did you see Taylor in the house? No, he did not. You didn't see any other body parts in the basement other than the severed head? And the officer said that was correct. Tara's daughter was in bed on the main floor. Did she get up at some point? The officer said when we did our protective sweep. He said he started the crime scene log and was relieved by Officer Zuwicki. Defense asks, how do you preserve a crime scene? And he says you put up tape and you monitor the point of entry and exit. He's asked when he arrives, is he walking in the driveway and whose cars are in the driveway? He says, I don't know. Did you confirm if any vehicle belonging to Taylor was in the driveway? He said he personally did not. He's asked if anything disturbed the crime scene in any way. He said no. Did Steve say he was unable to see what was in the bucket? The officer said he had difficulty with his vision in general. The next witness, Ethan Blanke, this is the other officer that was there with the last witness, first two that were there on scene. Tara began to tell her side of the story, and Officer Wanish went to the basement and told me he found a severed head in the bucket. He went down and saw a 5-gallon bucket with a beach towel that had been moved away. Inside was a severed head. After that, I looked around the basement and realized they needed to clear that house. After other officers arrived, he stayed with Tara and Steve to be sure they were safe while the sweep was happening. They were transported by other officers on scene, and he stayed until detectives and officers arrived to relieve him. So on cross, he's asked, what report did you receive? He said the complainant's girlfriend woke him up and said she found her son's severed head in a bucket. The defense says you parked on the street, you walked up, it's dark with snow on the ground. Who made contact first? And he said he did. Did you see cars in the driveway? Said he doesn't recall. Do you know who they belong to? He said, I did not run the plates. Did you go inside? He said, yes, I was talking to them. Were you on the first floor? He said, yeah, that's where I spoke to Stephen and Tara. Was there a decision to send one of you down to see what was in the basement? And then they ask who has more seniority, either him or Officer Wanish. And he said, Officer Wanish did. He's asked if he stood at the top of the stairs, and he said yes. He's asked, did you talk to Stephen? And he said, I mainly talked to Tara. Did Steve say when he went down he couldn't tell what it was? He said yes. He's asked, was Tara in a state of shock too? He said she seemed to be in a state of shock. The defense said Tara woke up and what made her go downstairs? He said she was awoken by the door and wanted to see if anyone was in the house. She didn't locate anyone who was alive in the basement. He said before the 911 call, she went upstairs to tell Stephen what she saw, and he said yes. She said Shad would come over and do laundry, and the officer said yes. He's asked if he wore gloves in the house. He says, I don't recall. Then he's asked, when you went downstairs, you looked in the bucket several times. Did you have a flashlight? He says yes. What color was the bucket? He said black and just to the right of the stairs. You see it as soon as you get to the bottom of the stairs. He's asked if he moved the contents and he said no. He asked if there was a towel removed by Officer Wanish there and he said yes. He said he didn't know where that towel was at that point. He's asked, where did they stand while you were there? Were they sitting? And he said they were in the kitchen standing. I'm assuming this is the family. Stephen and Tara slept in the loft part, and the ground level had a kitchen and a bedroom where Ava slept, and then the basement was partially finished. There was a laundry area, and it was cluttered, and he said yes. He's asked, what does starting a crime scene log involved? And he said, you put the address, add the name of anybody who enters, why they're there, and the time they're in and out. So that was it. The next witness, there was no sound at the witness's request. This is Shad's mother. It did actually cut back in on Cross, and the defense is asking, does he wear glasses? And Tara says yes. Tara's asked, does he lose his glasses? She said yes. I order 5 pair at a time. He has a hard time seeing without them. She's asked, you've talked to Detective Groff, who is here? She says yes. He starts asking about the vehicles, whose is whose. She has a Volkswagen Jetta and Steve has a Subaru Forester, and they park in the driveway. He spends a lot of time talking about cars in the driveway. He asked if she saw Taylor's gold minivan in the driveway, and she said yes. She's asked what door they used to go in, and she said the one off the side of the house. They did not use that front door to enter and exit the home. The defense says you went to the basement to bring the cat down, and she said earlier in the evening, yes, but she went back when she heard the door slam. She went to see if Shad was home, and if not, she was going to turn off the lights. She didn't see anyone, and going up the stairs, she saw the bucket with the towel. And he asked if it was a beach towel, and she said it was just a regular towel. The defense asked if she was worried her son was peeing in the bucket, and she said she didn't know it was covered. She took the towel off, and he asked how long did she look, and she said seconds, and then she put the towel back over the bucket and went to her bedroom to tell Stephen what she saw and asked him to look as well. The defense says he was in a dead sleep, speaking of Stephen, and she said yes. She walked down into the basement and asked him to look to verify what she saw is actually what she saw. He moved the towel, but was unsure what he was seeing. So they go upstairs to their bedroom to get their phones to call 911. The defense asked, is it fair if you didn't know who to call, non-emergency or 911? Could you have talked for 10 minutes to decide who to call? Could you have talked with Steve for 10 minutes to decide who to call? And she said, no, it didn't take that long. We were in shock. He asked, did you look one time? She said, I looked again when Stephen looked. He was right next to me. In February of last year, Shad was living with his father, Michael, and she says yes. And he would come to eat, hang out with his sister, his mom. And he asked, did you have to tell him to take a shower? She said he would shower there at the house, and the defense asked, were you worried he wasn't taking care of himself? And she says yes. When you heard the storm door slam, did you see anyone go inside or drive away? She says no. Nobody came upstairs when her and Stephen were up there, and Ava was awoken after the police were in the house. She never went to the basement that night. The defense says you didn't go back down after the officers came, and she said no. And then they all went to give a statement. She's asked, are the houses close together in your neighborhood and people park on the street overnight? She said the houses are close together, but they don't park there in the winter because of the snow plows. She's asked if the street is busy, and she said, no, you probably don't drive down it unless you live on that street. On February 22nd, when you and Stephen had an argument, he left and went to a bar. She said, yes. The defense asked if he was drinking all day, and she said, I wasn't with him. But when he came back, he said he had some drinks. She's asked when he got back, and she said, I don't know. It was light out, so maybe 5 o'clock in the evening. She's asked, do you remember when you went to bed? And she said, no. Well, when do you usually go to bed? She said 11. They watch TV. She's asked, do you have a cat? And does the cat have free reign of the house? She said, there is a litter box in the basement. The defense asked, did you hear talking on the 22nd and 23rd prior to the door slamming? And she said no. He asks, if you were upstairs in your bedroom, would it be difficult to hear anything in the basement? And she said, you wouldn't hear a thing. The next witness is Ava Wheelock. That's Shad's minor sister. She's going into her senior year in high school. She splits her time living between her mom and her dad's house. She has two older siblings. Her sister is 25. Shad was 25 when he was murdered. She was very close to Shad, and he was living with his dad in February at the time he was killed. They would see each other at their mom's house, and he had come to hang out with them and do laundry. February 22nd started out as a day of celebration. Her dad was getting married, so she went to her mom's afterwards. It was already dark outside when she got there. She didn't see anyone inside. She came in and went right to bed. On the 22nd, she heard footsteps going from the basement up to the first floor and heard a female voice, but didn't know who it was, and she didn't see who it was. She went to sleep and was eventually woken up by police banging on the door. She was moved into the kitchen with her mom and Steve. Then she was taken to the police department to talk to police. So on cross, he asks if she knows Taylor, and she said since she was a little kid. She was her brother's best friend. The defense asks if you park in your driveway. She says yes. She did see Taylor's van in the driveway when she came back from the wedding, but she didn't see Taylor, and she didn't see Shad that day. She heard mumbles, but it wasn't Shad. She did not go into the basement on the 22nd. Shad would come to the house randomly. There was no set schedule or set days he was expected to be there. The next witness, lead medical investigator, I could not get her first name, so I'm going to call her Ms. Schwab. They do the initial investigation, then that is reviewed by the chief medical examiner. She arrived on scene around 11 a.m. She placed her protective gear on and entered the living room where she was briefed by law enforcement on what information they had at that point. They had found a male's head and had reason to believe they had additional remains in the basement. And also, at that point, they had their suspect. Taylor was in custody. They also told her there could be a second location where body parts could be. She went to the basement for an overall view and to pronounce the death. Shad had a tattoo on one of his temples, and it was a question mark. She backed out of the scene and waited for the doctor to arrive. They move around the scene together. They first approached the bucket. They used these smaller body bags for the body parts. She said it's the size they use for infants and babies. They removed the remains one by one, documenting each one. They would photograph it and then place those remains in the body bag. The next container was a blue bag on a dresser in front of the bed in the basement. It had human tissue on the outside of the bag. Inside, they found human remains. Then they saw a pink and black backpack at the foot of the bed on the floor with blood staining. They also found human remains and knives in that bag. They found a blue tote bin that had laundry in it at the head of the bed on the floor. There was blood on the outside of that. Inside, they saw a substantial amount of blood and a torso with arms of a human male, muscle tissue, as well as organs. One thing that stood out was a lack of blood in the living space. They found some on the mattress and a small area of carpet with human tissue. Also, some tissue and blood in a shower, but there wasn't much outside of the containers. She thought there would have been more blood on scene, especially with a dismemberment. The significance of seeing so much damage to the body and lack of blood is, did it happen here? How did this happen in such a way that the blood was collected? They were missing a big portion of Shad's lower legs. They were told there may be potential human remains in a van that had been towed away from the apartment complex where Taylor lived. They responded to that location and photographed the outside of the vehicle, and the van had not been processed as investigators were waiting on them to arrive. They found a crock pot box with human remains, specifically the lower limbs. They showed this picture later on. You can see his thigh. The smaller bags were placed in larger body bags, and the remains were transported in a cooled van to Madison, Wisconsin for autopsy. A local funeral home and a morgue technician made the transport so the witness could go to the next scene. They show exhibits of the body bags, Clorox wipes, that crock pot box with blood inside, and also a Shout spray bottle, for like laundry stains. So on cross, body parts were found in different locations inside the basement in the home and others in a minivan. yes. He asked when she got to the home and she said 11 a.m. He asked about the duffel bag on the dresser and asked if it's a Jimmy Choo brand with handles. And she said she does not know the brand, but it's rectangle shaped with handles. Law enforcement pointed out pipes on the dresser they believed to be used for amphetamine. He asked if she had gloves on when she handled the duffel bag, and when she put them on, she said yes, and she would have put them on before she touched anything. There were mattresses stacked on top of each other. There were 3 different mattresses, just one on the other. She went to the backpack. He asked if it's an Under Armour bag, and she said she doesn't know the brand. It was black and pink with red staining on the outside. She's asked, why did you focus on that? And she said, the red staining on it. They tried to lift it, but it was too heavy for something you would have in a backpack. They unzipped it and placed the fragments of human remains in a body bag. He asked if she took the clothes off the tote bag, and she said they did that in conjunction with law enforcement. She's asked, was the tote difficult to see? And she said no, but it was back towards the back of the basement. She's asked, you didn't know whose remains were in the totes and the bucket? And she said, we had made a presumptive positive ID from booking photos from Shad with those tattoos, comparing that to the head in the bucket. Their inventory showed the remains were consistent with one human male. And the defense asked who confirmed that. She said Dane County. She was off the stand. The next witness, Michelle Chernesky. She works forensics with Green Bay PD. She explains how they take swabs from areas of interest. She collected Clorox wipe container, Pantene shampoo containers, 2 dog choke collars, a box, a sex toy. They located 6 knives in the basement, 3 in one of the bags, 2 in the bucket, and 1 in the teal tote. They use a specialized light called an ALS, which is an acronym for an alternative light source. It uses specific wavelengths of light to help locate body fluid stains on clothing or other items of evidence. It can find latent prints, body fluids, other things not seen with the naked eye. They did this on February 24th. They used it in the shower and near the mattress. Then if they see items or areas of interest, they can swab those areas and send them to the lab. So on cross, he asks who called her and who she met there and what they pulled up in. A police evidence van, and she said they're a crime scene truck. The defense says that's a special truck for crime scene. You got all the stuff in the truck and you rolled right up in front of the house. And she says yes. He lists who all she met with and what information she was given. He asks, did you go through the whole house? And she said she videotaped the entire house. Then he asked, did you go upstairs? And she's like, yes, videotaped the entire house. The defense says you were told to wait until the search warrant was obtained. And she said yes. He also asked if she had to turn the lights on to get a better view. She said yes. The defense asked, were there cell phones on the kitchen table collected? She said yes. He rattles off a bunch of different colors of the phones. She said she does not remember the colors the phone cases were. He mentions the swabs of the doors, the handles, toys, flooring, diapers downstairs, and she says yes. She also collected different items of evidence, such as 2 pipes, a bag with crystal powder, a Samsung cell phone, and she said yes. Did you find a black and blue Jimmy Choo bag on the stand? Yes. She's asked what was inside that bag, and she said bags and human remains. Did you see a pink and blue Under Armour bag? She said yes, it was on the floor next to the bed. He says, when you say bed, do you mean stacked mattresses? And she says yes. When you were there, the detective moved the bag and removed the contents. Yes. Where was the Under Armour bag? On the floor next to the mattress. Where was the sex toy? She said, I believe in a closet in the basement. He asked, was it on a shelf? She said it was in a wooden box on a shelf. He asked, was the box opened or closed? She said she didn't personally locate that item. She was just informed that that's where it was. He asks her, did you photograph it? Yes, she did. Did you take it out to photograph it? Yes, she did. On the Shout spray bottle, was there charcoal on there? And she's like, no, that's a dust that enhances fingerprints. He asked, did you see any? And she said, yes. In the minivan, there was all kinds of stuff, correct? And she said, there wasn't too much stuff in there. He starts rattling off things that were in there, a crock pot box, a laundry basket, all kinds of other items, correct? She said there was a cooler, just some odds and ends, but the condition of the van wasn't terrible. He asks, clothes? Yes. Was there a flag? She says, I don't remember. And he asked, but it filled up the back. And she said, I guess. The defense says, did you know what was in the crock pot box? And she said, no. And he said, I guess that was quite a surprise. And she said, yes. He asked if she's fully trained to do this ALS wavelength lighting on her own. She says yes, but then he asks, why did you have Holly there with you? She explains at the time that this other person had a better piece of equipment than they had. It was more up to date. Her equipment had a built-in camera, and so you could document, you could kind of kill two birds with one stone with that device, to where with them, they could not do both. So they would have to shine the light and then take a separate picture. Just easier to do this all with one device. She explained it as looking like an iPad. They call in the next witness, Bailey Andre. She's a forensic specialist with Green Bay Police Department. She works in the same unit as the previous witness. They work together. Her role was all photography, and she assisted with taking swabs and collecting evidence. They enter in a bunch of photos. Taylor looked at these photos as her defense attorney flipped through them. She looked at every photo, graphic, not graphic. Sometimes she would laugh. It was just very bizarre behavior. The defense asked that they wait to publish a couple of these photos until he can cross-examine. The judge said the witness had laid the foundation. The defense mentions one photo is more prejudicial than probative, and some of the photos are almost duplicates, just taken from different angles. Now, she was also at the storage facility to help process that gold minivan. She walks the state through how they use Blue Star to look for blood. You spray it on a surface, and if it's not visible or cleanup has happened, it'll make it glow. Also, they look at that with like a black light. They sprayed the shower, the bed, and the floor area, and they show photos of the shower area, their blood-soaked mattress, that blood soaked through multiple layers of that mattress. On February 25th, they processed items of evidence. She processed the shampoo bottle, the Clorox wipe container, the shout bottle. There was a rag, a towel, a pair of shorts. She said they processed a lot that day. They show a photo of the shout bottle with a sticker saying latent print 2 and 3. So they compared the latent prints on that bottle to the ones taken after Taylor was arrested. Latent print number 2, there was a hit for Taylor's right middle finger. They actually took a 10 print card and a palm print card when she was booked. Latent print 3 was Taylor's right thumb, and then they had a hit with the left ring finger as well on the backside of that shout spray bottle. They show a photo of a bloody knife. It looks like a steak knife with a wooden handle. She took swabs from the blade and the handle, and they show a photo of the inside of the crock pot box. You can see there's a larger blood stain on the bottom and then some smaller ones. She swabbed all that. She also swabbed the sex toy. On cross, she's asked, why did it take so long for the sex toy to get swabbed? It was swabbed, by the way, on March 4th of 2022. She said later in the investigation, they may request to have something swabbed that wasn't done initially. She also worked on processing the minivan. Did you find a registration and title, DMV registration receipt for a Scott Tomes? She says yes. You saw the crock pot box sitting inside a laundry basket. That laundry basket had folded clothes, and the basket was sitting in a seat behind the driver's side. She says yes. He also mentions the cooler that was in the van had nothing inside. The defense says you photographed an empty pill bottle for Scott Thomes with oxycodone inside the driver's side door, and she said yes. UN specialist Zarnecki processed the house on February 24th. Why a day late? She just explains the day before. They had worked very long hours. Everybody was exhausted. They needed rest. He asked if that's standard practice, and she said yes. He says some chemicals can cause the blue star to illuminate. That's not blood. She says yes. We know sometimes Clorox and things like that can cause it to turn bright, and it's not blood. The next witness, Philip Scallion, he is with the Detective Bureau. He's called in for more serious cases. He was in contact with investigators who were actively interviewing Taylor as he was in the home. They were looking for Shad's remains in the basement. So they kept in contact from the police station with information. They were learning about the location of Shad's remains. She told them to look beside the bed. They thought they were looking for a whole body at this point other than the head. And then she told them about the bags. They learned it wouldn't be a whole body, that they would be looking for body parts. They show photos of the crime scene, starting with the outside of the front of the house. The photo of a knife block with missing knives that were consistent with the knives found in the basement. There were 4 missing, and they recovered 4 knives from that compartment. Once in the basement, they start to process the scene. They started with what they knew, which was the bucket. The doctor removed the human remains, and non-human remains were also removed by the doctor, which were then put on display for the investigators and crime scene technicians to observe and note. Then forensic specialists got the non-human items of evidence processed, and the doctor did all the human remains. They show photos of 2 knives, a Jolly Rancher, a razor blade, and a nail, and a piece of human flesh that was removed from that bucket that Shad's head was in. They're going through these photos, and she looks and gives a big smile. It was really creepy. I'm going to throw that up on the screen on YouTube. He goes through pointing out the bags that had human remains, essentially. He learned from detectives that were talking to Taylor that this is where the body was cut up, was in that basement. He found it remarkable there was no blood on the carpeting. They found blood and tissue on the far side of the bed where there's a concrete floor. And they show a photo of cleaning supplies, pipes, a baggie with a small amount of meth, a shampoo bottle, the Shout spray bottle, a tote bag. You can barely see a little dog choker chain in this photo, and then a close-up of that chain. They bring that chain out to show the jury. And they also show photos of bloody wipes found in a Walmart shopping bags that were removed from that Jimmy Choo bag. They show photos of several knives that are covered in blood, and the paring knife blade is bent on one, and a tip of a steak knife is off. That was later recovered during autopsy in his body. They show defense new photos, and she's looking at him. He asks her something, and she says, "No, I'm fine." They show a bloodstained mattress and then a blue container with tissue on the side. And then at the top, you can see what I assume to be part of his torso kind of sticking up out of that storage bin. They show a photo of the sex toy, the shower with the red substance and flesh in the drain, concrete floor with blood stains. There was also a shoe impression, and he noticed that some cleaning had been done in that area. They show a photo of the crock pot box in the van, and you do see a picture of Shad's thigh in that box. So that ended the day today. This witness will be back tomorrow. A lot of pictures. They are showing a lot of these photos on the stream. So if you're so inclined, you can go scroll through, use that little slider at the bottom so you don't have to watch. You can see when the pictures pop up. Mainly kind of after lunch is when these pictures really came into play. But again, just out of respect, I'm not going to show them here. All right, guys, that's it for today. We'll see you soon.